evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
Great, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, Councilwoman DeBala will not be with us this evening. She's taken ill, so hopefully she'll have a speedy recovery. On our agenda, there's no changes to our agenda this evening. Looking at future council meetings, we will not be meeting next Wednesday on October 9th, as is Yom Kippur. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, October 16th. It will be our regular city council meeting here in the auditorium. It will begin at 7:30. Our voting session will include the first reading ordinance authorizing an FY 2020 budget amendment number 2, single reading ordinance awarding a contract for a legislative advocate. Tentatively, we have a resolution adopting the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan, and tentatively, the first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code regarding placement of private signs and advertisements in the public right-of-way. Our work sessions that evening will be a discussion of replacement vehicle purchases, discussion of technology purchases, discussion of resolution approving community development block grant program, a discussion of memorandum of understanding with Montgomery County Board of Elections, a discussion of contract for speed cameras, and at the end of all that, we have a discussion of the tree ordinance that evening. Then I know it shouldn't, not at all. And then Wednesday, October 23rd, we again will meet here at 7:30. We have a public hearing at the beginning of our meeting regarding charter amendments regarding elections. Our voting session, tentatively, we have a single reading ordinance authorizing execution of a contract for speed cameras. Tentatively, a single reading ordinance approving replacement vehicle purchases. A tentative single reading ordinance approving purchase of computers. A tentative single reading ordinance approving purchase of Adobe Creative Cloud licenses. Tentatively, a resolution approving community development block grants. Tentatively, a second reading ordinance of the FY 2020 budget amendment number 2. And tentatively, the second reading ordinance regarding the placement of private signs, advertisement, and public right-of-way. And we have a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a memorandum of understanding with Montgomery County Board of Elections. And I think I said the speed camera one, never mind. And then our next work session on trees will be that evening. We're going to have work sessions, 3 of them in the month of October. So we'll start October 16th and have one on the 23rd, and then on the following Wednesday. And that's what we're doing. I wanted to give people a heads up that we will not be meeting on Wednesday, November 20th, as a number of members of the City Council will be at the National League of Cities meeting. So we are looking for possibly adding a Monday council meeting on November 18th. So if council members can respond to me whether or not they can do that, I'd appreciate it. This evening we have 2 proclamations. The first is today is an Energy Efficiency Day, and so we have the proclamation that states, whereas energy efficiency is the cheapest, quickest, and cleanest way to meet our energy needs and reduce utility bills for residential, business, and industrial customers. And whereas smart energy use reduces the amount of electricity we need to power our lives, which helps avoid power plant emissions that can harm our health, pollute our air, and warm our climate. And whereas cutting energy waste saves U.S. consumers billions of dollars on their utility bills annually, up to $500 per household from appliance efficiency standards alone. And whereas implementing energy efficiency and other clean energy policies and programs helps boost economic opportunities and job creation while continuing to move toward a sustainable future. And whereas more than 2.3 million Americans work in energy efficiency sector in local, good-paying, clean energy jobs that can't be outsourced, and increasing efficiency will create more of them. And whereas for cities and states tackling harmful pollution, energy efficiency can get them about halfway toward their climate goals. And whereas the residents of Tacoma Park can continue to contribute to energy efficiency efforts by learning about and participating in our energy efficiency programs. And whereas a national network of energy efficiency groups and partners has designated the first Wednesday in October as National Annual Energy Efficiency Day. And whereas together the residents of Tacoma Park, Maryland can continue to contribute to our sustainable efforts by learning more about energy efficiency and practicing smarter energy use in their daily lives. Therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor, do hereby proclaim October 2nd, 2019 as Energy Efficiency Day in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and urge residents to join us in supporting our clean energy goals and moving toward more energy efficiency now and in the future. Hey, that was a mouthful. Next, our second proclamation is in recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'll read this one as well. Whereas Columbus Day is observed as a federal holiday on the second Monday in October, and whereas the day recognizes the October 12, 1492 landing of Christopher Columbus on an island in the Caribbean, marking the Europeans' first contact with the New World. And whereas this contact began centuries of settlement on lands already occupied by native peoples of the Americas and exploitation of the New World's seemingly endless resources. And whereas Indigenous Americans experienced conquest, enslavement, displacement, and disease, which decimated the populations. And whereas Native people who were removed from this area likely include the Piscataway and the Anacostan. And whereas the City Council recognized the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day by adopting Resolution 2017-39, reimagining Columbus Day as an opportunity to celebrate Indigenous heritage and resiliency. And whereas, although it is a federal holiday, Columbus Day is not a holiday for the City of Tacoma Park employees, and city government functions and meetings continue on their usual schedule. And whereas recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day serves as a reminder to reflect on the Native people who are here before us and their descendants. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the City Council, staff, and residents, hereby proclaim October 14th, 2019 as Indigenous Peoples Day in Tacoma Park to acknowledge and celebrate the culture and sacrifice of the first people on this land. And so those are our two proclamations. We have two presentations and reports today, and I am very happy to welcome to our meeting tonight Dr. Gabby Tayak, the Piscataway historian, who can come to our podium and talk to us about the Piscataways. Is it on? I can turn it on.
Is it on?
Yeah,
It's
you're good.
on.
Go.
Well, hi. I'd like to give my greetings and Thanksgivings to all of you from all the way across the street where I live. And just, it feels like such a good homecoming and moment to be here with you, and also all of you who are here and those who might be watching on record, to thank you for having this acknowledgement, because our peoples are so invisible sometimes. And at the same time, the Piscataway Indian Nation, which is the tribe to which I belong, is one of the state-recognized tribes of Maryland, along with the Piscataway Conoy tribe. So we've been here for thousands of years, and we've actually been conscientiously here in Tacoma Park for a very long time also. I've had relatives that live right on Maple Avenue since the 1950s. And I'm actually here in Tacoma Park because this is a place that has been a place of activism and mobilization for a very, very long time. And some of the most significant national and international movements of Indigenous peoples have gotten energized and organized and received out of people, out of a group that was right here in Tacoma Park. So I want to, bring that up to the president into your consciousness and acknowledgement. People like Dave Wachter, Berdina Henry, Martine Porty, Joe Morales, who worked for many, many years at House of Musical Traditions, all people who've been engaged with Indigenous people. So when you speak about Piscataway, I want to just give a little bit. We can go on and on. I've kind of made a career out of this, I guess, in a way, in the sense of being able to be among those who had great grandmothers and grandfathers who got up every day and remembered who they were and stayed where they were, and then maybe also had to leave. Our people's name, Piscataway, means where the waters blend. And so it refers to the confluence of waters. And that meaning in itself marks a lot of our identity. Our people have taken in and intermarried with people who've been enslaved Africans, indentured Europeans, people of color, people who are immigrants for a very, very long time. And at the same time have also kept a sense of self. My father, who was born and raised in Washington, D.C., left at the age of 16 in 1944 because of the depth of racism, and where he said, you know, people hated us. And he raised me in New York City, and he spent a life out at sea, but I always came back home. And knowing that I could come back here when I was about 15 and spend that time trying to understand what happened to us, and for many, many years wondering why doesn't anybody even know about us, right? You know, this erasure that you speak about that happened at 1492 and onward. And so this is something that at the same time, we know that all of these places that you walk on, they have those memories, and they have the continuation of our people. The river like Potomac River, the Anacostan, named for the Nacotchtank people. These are all names that you say every day. The springs and the waters and the fields and the tide water, you know, it's like about knowing who we are and what's happened. So I just wanted to, I did want to thank you, and also to have a sense of understanding that Piscataway was part of a web of Native peoples that stretched all the way from what they call the fall line, all the way down the Potomac to the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. When you look at the maps of John Smith, who is not like the so cute blonde Disney guy, okay, just wasn't, and Pocahontas, also known as Matoka, was 11 years old when the mythological encounter happened, and I've had a love-hate relationship with Pocahontas like all my life. I like her now. She's interesting. But when you look at this map, you'll see that every waterway, every tributary, every single one is inhabited by towns, villages, settlements of people that were there. And they didn't just disappear. Something happened to us. So understanding that history, and I appreciate what you said about resiliency, because my daughter, Jansikwe, who is now a senior at Blair, and Jansikwe is named for my great-grandmother, Jan Siapi, which means beautiful river, which refers to the Potomac River. So Jansikwe is named Beautiful River Woman. She got up at the youth climate strike with other indigenous people and young people on Friday. I think it was September 20th. And she was wearing a t-shirt that said strong, resilient, and indigenous. And she doesn't have to choose. You know, she doesn't have to forget who she is. And we can be in this community. And I chose it not just for the activism, but because I felt that this was some place that my children could be who they are and be proud and be confident. And so when you make this resolution, that's a huge piece of it. There is a lot to say. I would recommend to everyone that in addition to acknowledging Indigenous Peoples Day, which is so amazing to hear that, so many years to get to this. But go to the water. just go down to Sligo Creek and say hello to it, you know, and think about yourselves, the veins in your body, how it's related. Give a greeting to the people who are still here and who are not here, because there's a lot of people who are not here, and there are real reasons for that. And also understanding that our role as Piscataway people is not just about ourselves, but we've taken on a role over the past 110 years at least. I'm a fourth generation Native activist. My children are a fifth generation activist. And a lot of it is because of everything that happened to us. We don't want it to ever happen to anybody else. We really don't. And it is. And so for the Indigenous people who are also coming here and live among us, people who are refugees, people who are trying to make a home, it's about receiving them too. So those issues are very present, as we know with what was happening on Laurel. But I would just like to say to you on this day that the work isn't finished. It's in progress. You know, we're still here, and it matters. And we're not going anywhere, so, you know, we can have this conversation for a very, very long time. But I appreciate all of the thought. I appreciate this community. I appreciate the fellowship and the capacity to live in a way that has an Indigenous sensibility, which is about being family. So, seeing ourselves as family. And with that, I would like to say Wanishi, which in our language means thank you. And we'll go forward and we'll talk some more and make great plans. Congratulations to you on this acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great. Our next presentation and update is from our Youth Council.
Hello. So we've had our first two meetings for the 2019-2020 Youth Council term. I've been serving as the interim chairperson. We were going to elect a chairperson last meeting to officially, basically the chairperson makes the agendas, all that sort of stuff. But we decided we didn't have enough people, so we would postpone it until our next meeting, which is going to be on Monday. We have 9 of our 11 positions filled currently, so the 2 positions left over are available to any Tacoma Park resident between 12 and 18, and not from wards 2 and 5. Those we already have two members each from those wards. On Monday this week, we partnered with Meals on Wheels and Piney Branch Elementary School for an SSL event where MCPS students could come and volunteer and get some SSL hours. That was well attended. It was a success. We got a couple kids to come and help out in the community and get their hours doing it. We are planning on hosting another documentary screening, which we will be reaching out about soon. Last one went pretty well. We had a lot of people come and talk about this really great movie we got to see, and we plan to do that again. The other thing we did, last meeting we approved a new attendance policy for the Youth Council because this is something we've had a problem with in the past, and we submitted it through Jesse for you guys to have a look at and, you know, I guess approve since you guys appoint us. So I'll read it right now. Being a Youth Council member requires commitment, and because we only meet once every 2 weeks, the most important part of that commitment is meeting attendance. In the past, we've had members who came to meetings sporadically at best, and it made it more difficult for us to accomplish our goals. If we don't have quorum, we can't officially vote, and we have to spend time in meetings reaching out to those who are absent. So from now on, if a Youth Council member misses 3 meetings without first notifying another member or our advisor, we will recommend that they be removed from the council. We have tried really hard on this issue, and it's something that we've struggled with pretty much since we were created. and it's understandable, people have commitments, but we just ask that members let someone know before they can't make it. And I think that's a pretty fair thing to ask. And then the last thing is we've been in contact with County Councilmember Reamer about collaborating to create a youth county council, which would be a really cool thing if we could make that happen. So yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, George, and thank you for serving as the interim chair. We appreciate it. Great. Those are all our reports. We don't have minutes tonight. Well, we sort of have minutes. I have a report out from our closed session last week. After our meeting last September 25th, the council voted to go into a closed session at 9:44. We reviewed a proposal for the legislative advocate proposal. The second thing was proposals received from legal services firms. And the third thing was personnel matters that affect one or more specific individuals. The meeting was closed pursuant to Annotated Code of Maryland, General Provisions, Article 3-305B1 and 14. And the three things that we reviewed and made decisions on. The first is after reviewing of the proposals, the council agreed on the selection of public policy partners as our legislative advocate. They have been our legislative advocate for a number of years, so we're continuing that relationship, and an ordinance will be scheduled to formalize the selection. The second thing was from the legal services proposals received, the council selected firms to bring in for interviews, and we'll be doing that in early November. The third item, the city manager briefed council on certain personnel matters. Related to one of these personnel matters, the city manager recommended changing the duties and titles of 2 positions in the finance department, as well as the reporting structure for the positions. One of the 2 senior accounting assistant positions would be changed to a payroll and accounting specialist. The budget specialist position would be changed to a budget and accounting manager position. These changes would not impact the number of FTEs or the full-time employees in the finance department, but would increase the department's FY20 personnel budget by about $25,000. The council authorized the city manager to proceed. The increase will be included in the next budget amendment to be voted on by the council. And so those are the minutes from our closed session that adjourned at 11:10 p.m. last Wednesday.
And Mayor, and
Yes.
further information is in my city manager comments that describes a little bit more about the finance department positions.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Now we will have public comments on voting items. We have 2 voting items tonight. First is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for services with Start Up in Residence. Do I have any public comments on that? Seeing none, then we have a consent agenda that has a resolution providing for a reappointment to the Ethics Commission and a resolution providing for appointments to the Grants Review Committee. Any comments on that? Seeing none, we'll move into our voting session. The first item is a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for services with Start Up in Residence. We didn't have a work session on this beforehand because it is timely, but it is really cool, so I'm going to turn it over to city manager to talk about it. Or?
I'm actually going to ask our economic development manager to speak to it briefly. The item did come in late because it's fast-moving, and then we had staff at the race equity training, so made it a little bit of a challenge. Ms.
Hi,
Samir?
everyone. Thank you for a moment to speak about this, and again, my apologies for the late submission. It came across my desk really quickly, and we're ready to get it moving by next week. So Startup in Residence is a cohort program for cities that are interested in innovating. The actual umbrella organization is called City Innovate. Startup in Residence pairs government challenges with technology partners, and together we come up with a solution that benefits the city. It's a way of piloting a small business tech firm here, and if you can call it that, it's a micro incubator in that these tech firms are working with local governments for sometimes the first time. They've been in the private industry and are interested in doing public good work. So if you can imagine, the partnership really is about the city staff working with the tech firms to solve a city challenge. We have internally come up with several different types of challenges, which I've kind of sent that information out. And we're looking forward to the tech firm to actually provide a really cool solution. And there's a 16-week turnaround on this, which is also exciting. Any questions?
I'll just add to this. So we did
Sure.
have $10,000 in the economic development budget for something like this. This helps kind of, as it's indicated, to kind of to stir the pot. The challenge topics that we've submitted are workforce development, inclusive community engagement, internal file sharing and knowledge transfer, and business identification and familiarization. And these various things are things that we can't do internally. We do need help with. It is exciting to be able to kind of do the smart technology concept for some things, and also to let technology firms know about the city of Tacoma Park and to use us as their way to find ways to serve others. So this is something that a number of cities have been doing, but not on this East Coast as
Not
much.
on the East Coast. It's been very popular on the West Coast, and we are working with City Innovate. They were very excited, specifically about Tacoma Park, because of our reputation for being thought leaders in areas of innovation. Also, because we're a small city, which is great for piloting and great for scaling for something like tech firms. They don't have to be big manufacturers. They don't have to be huge retail fronts. They can be small tech firms. They can land here, love everything that we've worked hard to grow and maintain, and they can grow their businesses here. So I also see this as a business attraction piece for smaller tech firms. This is not a conversation about a tech corridor or anything like that. But if you can think about it in a kind of Tacoma Park appropriate way, we really do want creative businesses here who have, low carbon footprints, for example, and the work that'll be done will be telework. So we don't even expect to have to hop on the metro in the car, et cetera, to get there.
The other things, just to make a note, we're not obligated in any way to use any of this or to purchase anything extra. This is us participating in this process, and if it looks valuable, we can move forward and come back to council and say we'd like to move forward or do some aspect of it differently. And that's something we don't know what it will be, but it sounds exciting. This is a very different thing than a normal process where we put out an RFP and we choose a firm. This is firms kind of lobbying to be chosen in a different way.
Yeah, it's called challenge-based procurement. So you don't put out your specs and scopes, you just put out the challenge, and they respond to the challenge. So the end of the 16 weeks, we'll have a demo day to figure out what that final product looks like.
The final issue is that, what's the deadline?
October 9th.
October 9th is
yes.
something. So we did not have an opportunity to bring this, to do the full work session and regular
Yeah.
process.
That's one question. So, thank you, it sounds really interesting. The 4 bullet points, those are all out there, and a responding firm could pick any of those that they wanted to, is that right, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the challenges
Not
will go.
limiting it just to one.
Yep, all 4 of those
Okay.
challenges will go out, and we will then evaluate the responses. But those are the 4 challenges, and we write a narrative to kind of be clear about what the issue is around workforce development or engagement.
Great. This sounds terrific. Great topics as well. So, great. Would someone like to move the single reading ordinance?
Moving.
Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilwoman Searcy. Can the clerk please call the vote? Or any other conversation or question? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll, or the vote, sorry.
Councilmember Kovar, Councilmember DeBala, Councilmember Costick, Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy, Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, next we have a consent agenda. Would someone like to move the consent agenda? Councilwoman Costick, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilwoman Searcy. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right. Now we'll move on to any other public comments. So anyone have public comments this evening? Mr. Silverman? Oh, wait, you're not on. Now you're on.
Larry Silverman, Birch Avenue. I was here last week to talk about climate change and preparedness, and the mayor said, put it in writing. She may regret that. So I've got the preface to the book. The first page that I've handed out is just an outline of some of the key thoughts and issues which I think the city needs to deal with a little bit better than they have. The second page is really about the first point, and I'll talk about that mostly this evening, which is preparing for climate change. We have a lot of effort going on to diminish our carbon footprint, but and which will be perhaps a benefit 30 or 40 or 50 years from now. But the immediate issue with climate change is that it's coming our way, storms and fires and plagues of biblical proportions. And so the question is, what should the city be doing to deal with this threat, which is really an imminent threat? It may be next week, it may be 5 years from now, but it's definitely coming our way. And so the first point I want to make is, let's talk a little bit about flooding. I think the city has some knowledge of flooding because we have a good stormwater program, but that's not all of it, or perhaps not even half of it. The stormwater problems will cause flooding, particularly on the streets, which is not altogether bad sometimes, but a lot of people, last spring, we had a lot of rain, as you remember, and I think there are a lot of people whose basements were flooded and had other problems. I think it would have been a good idea for the city to have mapped that or to send out a sort of survey so we know where the problems are during periods of somewhat extreme weather, with the expectation that as bad as it is in a particular storm, it could be 5 or 10 times worse the next storm that comes by. I think that would help us prepare if we understand the issue. I think we need some sort of plan. That's number one. Secondly, the urban forests. Strong winds are coming our way. A lot of those trees will fall. We love those trees. They produce all kinds of environmental benefits, but after a large windstorm, they will create all kinds of misery. And whatever problems, if your roof is blown off, that's terrible, but if your roof is blown off and a large oak tree falls on your house, that's a lot worse and more difficult to deal with. So I think it's time to really look at our forest as a forest and not just a collection of trees, and begin to identify hazards that are likely, and also to think through a strategy for dealing with them and preventing them. Same with drought. In the Forest Service, if there's a drought year,
Thank you, Mr. Silverman. That's 3 minutes.
I've got, well, it's all written here.
I very much appreciate for you writing it out, and we will share it with our sustainability manager who's working on our climate change plan.
And I
Yeah.
threatened to come back. I just want to say.
We look forward to seeing you. It is not a threat. Any other public comments this evening? Ms. Machui?
Mary Jane Machui, Ward 2. I won't be here as often now because I'm sharing our one car with my son, and he needs it for work. So, and I don't really feel good about walking home at night. I can't hardly, my depth perception is really poor, especially at night. Anyways, I just want to say, I'm going to go around the block here with all this, but a lot has to do with my different abilities. I'm a 71-year-old woman who has lived in Tacoma Park for over 35 years. My son, who was born here, and I do not communicate in a manner considered normal by many people. However, we have some very good ideas. And talking about housing gentrification, members of Parents of Special Needs Adults, which I helped found, acknowledge the housing for grown children is a major concern, especially for those with insufficient financial and social support. I am really, really afraid that my son will end up on the street in a few years. I'm 71 and I'm starting to, my brain is not functioning as well. I'm his only support. He cannot afford the over $6,000 in property taxes we now pay there. He gets $23,000 a year on his lousy job, which they don't tell him to the day before whether he shows up and when. I would like you to do something to discourage the conversion of the few remaining small homes in Tacoma Park into larger, more expensive ones. They are my bosses. I've never been a boss my entire life, and I see all these people who are buying these $800,000 houses, they were people who used to be my boss. When I see them, I'm sorry, but I feel these were people that always told me I wasn't good enough. So I'm sorry, but that's how I feel. And that's the way, you know. Anyways, I would like to give tax relief to low-income homeowners, and I would especially say something for those with psychiatric illnesses, which make up the majority of homeless people. This is unacceptable. Please encourage good psychiatrists to practice here. They're very few and far between, really. It's hard to find a psychiatrist. Either they don't take your insurance, or they don't take new people, or they're out in Gaithersburg. And when our city buys an appropriate property, please turn it into a low-income dwelling for several disabled residents. Pedestrian safety, please have walkways on both sides of the street. Don't narrow already too narrow streets. I get stressed out driving down the street. My hands shake like this. I cannot take it. I always have to move over, let somebody go by me. They're too narrow. Don't make them more narrow. No more bump outs. Please. And cement is dangerous, and I've got wounds to show it. And I guess it was it. That was that 3 minutes.
Yep, that's 3 minutes,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chewy. Thank
Bye.
you very much. Have a good evening. Any other public comments this evening?
Arthur David Olson, Herbie Hancock Avenue. The racial equities considerations section of the cover memo for the Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan states that the recommendations will identify opportunities that will positively impact all residents, and especially people of color, including immigrants and refugees. Alas, the plan itself includes no specific strategies for positively impacting people of color, immigrants, or refugees, and in fact includes absolutely no mentions of these groups. I am sure such strategies are needed. Since 2015, the Council has adopted 3 resolutions welcoming refugees and encouraging landlords to house refugees and asylees. But Tacoma Park continues to have higher housing costs than nearby parts of Prince George's County, making refugee agencies reluctant to settle people here and rendering our welcome hollow. I hope the Council will at least mention people of color, immigrants, and refugees in the strategic plan. I further hope that the Council will include strategies, such as use of the city's housing fund, for improving the lives of these people. Thank you.
Any other public comments this evening? Okay, seeing none, I'll turn to council comments. Any council members have comments this evening? Councilman Costick.
I just have two quick things. Saturday is the Pinecrest neighborhood picnic for their neighborhood association. So I encourage people to come out to that. It's between 3 and 6 p.m. and they are closing down the street. Can't offhand remember if it's 4th Avenue or 5th Avenue, but it's one of those, and it's always a great event. So I hope people in the neighborhood will come out. And the other thing is, I just wanted to remind people, there's been some things circulating on listservs about this, but I know the word doesn't get out to everyone. It's very dry outside, as we all know, and please take some time to water your trees in particular. A lot of times we don't think about the fact that they need water because they're just there and they're losing their leaves anyway, and we might not be noticing them, but it is very dry, so take some time to give them a good watering. Thanks.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. Just 3 things I wanted to mention. One is I've complained a lot about State Highway Administration over the years, and I think most people are pleased that they've now, WSSC, under the supervision of State Highway, has paved a good portion of Philadelphia Avenue where it's been very uneven surface for a long time, and there's a little bit more for them to do there. But there also are some important safety steps that we need to have taken, in particular, among other places, in particular at the intersection of Piney Branch in Philadelphia. And our former mayor, Bruce Williams, circulated something to us just by chance recently, which were some old minutes and other analysis that he had done looking back at past history of Tacoma Park. And in 1941, in the fall of 1941, just actually a few weeks before Pearl Harbor, as it turned out, he did a write-up on some of the things that were happening here in the city council then, and they were looking at trying to address safety concerns at the intersection of Philadelphia Avenue and Piney Branch. So it's been going on for decades. I think now we're in a position where maybe we could complete the work that at least as long ago as 1941 they were working on. So I thank Bruce for sending that to us and hope that can serve as an illustration of what we need to do there. Second thing is, I was pleased to hear, and I know the mayor and others were partly responsible for this, that Darrell Braithwaite, the director of our Public Works Office, is working on planning an event regarding the tree infestation that's been taking place here in the city, and particularly affecting some of the oldest oaks in the city. And a lot of residents have a lot of questions about how to handle it, what to do, is there financial assistance available, how do you know if you have it, what happens over the winter, do the insects die, do they go somewhere else, et cetera. And the hope is if we can swing it, a lot of the arborists that she's contacted are very busy because they're actually working with people in the area to cut down trees, that we can get some outside experts to come and make a presentation in several weeks from now, and we'll certainly publicize that when that happens. And then the third thing is, this past Monday, there was a public meeting actually here connected to the application by Crown Castle, which is the company that does the majority of the installations of small cell towers around the country, and they're going to have a series of them, but this was the first one on Merrimack Drive. One of the things that was interesting, we had about 25 people or so show up for the mandated community meeting, one of the things that we required in the ordinance that we passed. And one of the things that emerged, and this may have just been an oversight on our part, was that the required notices to all the residents and businesses within 500 feet of the site, that was done. Crown Castle did follow the rule and do that, but we had missed the reality that in some parts of the city, if the notices aren't in English, they might not really have a big effect. And so I think in this case, it seems like the city staff and Crown Castle are going to work together to address that. But we had talked previously, after we had one or several of these community meetings, about maybe there would be a few additional changes we would need to make to our ordinance to address new aspects of the situation that emerge once we actually get into it. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to look at that at some point in the coming months. If we do, to me, having a requirement for the appropriate languages strikes me as something that would be worth us considering, along with some of the other changes that we've noticed. So I just mentioned that as we continue thinking about this. Thanks.
Yeah, can I just ask the city manager, couldn't we just do that under the administrative regs?
I will check. I mean,
And
that
I
still
thought there
goes
was a
through
federal
process.
requirement for limited English proficiency residents that Crown Castle would have to do it, so we should probably just look into that.
We'll look into it. I mean, it certainly is moving forward.
Yeah, I'm
but-
not sure we need to,
Yeah.
I actually think there's,
If it can be done more easily, sure.
yeah, so, great. Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Well, first I want to echo Councilmember Kovar's first appreciation of Darrell Braithwaite and all of the work that she put in with organizing the community meeting. One thing that did come up is that Crown Castle did agree to translate as a courtesy materials going forward. However, this is one prime case of where if we don't translate, the residents that are going to be the most highly impacted will never know. I also want to thank Community Vision and the number of residents that turned out because of their advocacy. It was really good to see that although the residents that would be highly impacted were, perhaps not aware or wouldn't understand what's happening, to have residents throughout the city advocating on their behalf. So definitely appreciate all of those who organized and came out on Monday. Also want to thank Bethesda Cares, John Mendez. The mayor and I had an opportunity to sit down with him on Friday. Bethesda Cares is a nonprofit that works in the Crossroads area to try to match homeless individuals that they find on the street with housing. And it was amazing because he knew people by name that are in the area, and has already followed up with me about trying to identify areas along the creeks where there may be people camping. And so I encourage staff to, I encourage residents to please let me know. I know that one person has already sent a note saying, hey, no, Talisha, I've seen people at this specific location at this time. I definitely encourage folks to do that. Let me know if you see homeless individuals out. It's particularly important because fortunately the weather is atypical right now. It's a little warmer. But winter will soon be coming, and so all that we can do to collectively work to try to make sure that people who are not in housing are able to access housing is going to be critically important. Just want to make that announcement. Also, I know I saw in the city manager's comments that she will be addressing purple line traffic. I know it has been something that has been the bane not only of my existence, because I live on a street where lots of people are backing up in my driveway, but residents in New Hampshire Gardens, as well as Hillwood Manor, as well as businesses in the Crossroads. We are definitely all working collectively to try to figure out a solution. I've had conversations with MTA staff. We're working the MTA angle. We're trying to have conversations or at least get information from Purple Line Transit Partners on prior traffic studies that they might have done to see whether or not we might be able to leverage any of those data. We've already reached out to Councilmember Hucker. He's following up with folks, as well as our delegate, Laura Charkoudian, who is also working to schedule a meeting where we can try to sit down and talk with Purple Line Transit Partners and MTA and folks about some of the struggles that people are experiencing with Purple Line construction. Definitely encourage folks to continue to make me aware of issues as you become aware of them. In my last update, I did a quick pulse check on traffic, so definitely encourage people to take a few minutes to, it can be very therapeutic to just write down how frustrated you are. But definitely take a few minutes to fill out the survey, give me extra comments, air your grievances, and we're working to try to identify a strategy for addressing traffic concerns. I should also say that Police Chief Duvall has also agreed to increase patrol in the area. So definitely want to encourage folks to please complete that pulse check. Lastly, just want to thank my colleagues. I enjoyed the lemonade stand. A lot happened on Friday. It seems like forever ago, but it was just Friday. It was a great chance to sit down to not only think on our feet with delivering lemonade expeditiously.
I want to thank the council members for their assistance in making lemonade and helping serve it and all of the other things that we needed, getting extra cups, the whole bit.
So it was a fun time. And also want to give a special shout out to the Crossroads Development Authorities, management of the night market last Saturday. The bands were amazing, the food was amazing, and the beer was still good. So definitely want to encourage folks to sign up to learn more about the wonderful events that the CDA is doing. I think there will be a holiday market, which will be near the recreation center. So we're excited about hosting an event, or Kaylee's excited about hosting an event that will actually also encompass residents in Hampshire Towers as well as Tacoma Overlook. So definitely want to encourage folks to come out to future events. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I just have a couple of things. And I just want to piggyback on what Councilwoman Searcy said about Bethesda Cares. It was a great meeting, and I think as we're discussing our strategic plan on housing and economic development, having that conversation was really helpful. Let's see, you already talked about the lemonade stand. That was awesome. The Crossroads Market. Last night, a number of staff, myself, Councilman Dabala, and Costick met with many of the businesses located in Tacoma Junction to talk to them about parking issues, traffic, the normal deliveries. But it was a great meeting. We had a really good turnout, and I just want to thank all the businesses that came out, as well as Laura Barkley and the staff that were there. And so we hope to continue doing that on a regular basis. And speaking of a business in Tacoma Junction, last week we were able to celebrate with Dolly at R&S Automotive, as his station is the very first in the country to be converted from a gas station to an electric vehicle, all electric vehicle charging station. And so that was really exciting. I do want to especially thank the staff who worked on the event, Donna Wright, Gina Matthias, and Darryl Braithwaite. And I just want to say thank you very much to the head of our Public Works Department. This would not have happened if Darryl had not talked to Dolly, and if Dolly hadn't have thought about doing this, converting to the EV chargers, and if his daughter hadn't been so persistent in getting him to do it. So this was a great partnership and working together. And then this morning, it has been a busy day. This morning was Walk to School Day. Started bright and early at Tacoma Park Middle School. We were joined by Representative Raskin at Tacoma Park Elementary School, and then we were at Piney Branch. I want to thank Lucy Neary and all the work she does for the Safe Routes to School. I did get asked a question regarding schools sort of outside our geographic region, Rolling Terrace and East Silver Spring, that many of our residents, students go to. And I just want to make sure people know that Lucy provides planning support and supplies to Rolling Terrace and East Silver Spring as well. It's just a little hard given the start times of when the school started, but she and I have already talked about potentially having a presence there next year. We'll just get her.
We also have to coordinate with Montgomery County Police,
Right.
which is one of the other
things. So we'll just get her to a porter so she can be in many places at once. We only have one Lucy, but we're very lucky that we have her. So I think that's it for me. I'll turn it over to the city manager. Oh, Councilmember Carver.
To say one thing, I just wanted to thank Gabrielle Tagg for that thoughtful and poignant rumination on her personal history and the connection of that to the history of Native Americans in this country. And on one side of my family, my relatives came here several hundred years ago, not in this part of the country, and that, of course, inevitably means that they came in contact with the indigenous peoples who were there, and most of that interaction is forgotten. And so I just think it's really great. Number one, it's nice that we took the time to establish the day under a new name, but I really appreciate the presentation and kind of getting more of a personal sense for what it means, so there's not just this symbolic thing we took. So I neglected to say that before. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I just want to say that we have already talked about having this be a more ongoing thing, and to do more, just more in depth and understanding the history of this area, and not just the history, but the people who still live here in our community. And so we're looking for great things, more work ahead. But thank you so much for being here. All right, now I'll turn it over to the city manager. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So besides the kudos to Lucy for the work on the Walk to School Day activities, she just got another grant of $86,494. I believe it's the 10th year in a row that we've received grants for our various Safe Routes to Schools program. The budget for this includes some coordinator salary money, some non-infrastructure activities, and the I Can Shine Bike Camp, which was a discussion that we had some time ago during the budget. There's more information about congrats to R&S Automotive, and it was very nice that we had really good regional and national media attention. Last night, at last night's meeting with the Tacoma Junction businesses, Mr. Dolly seemed so happy. It's just really nice to see. And we're certainly proud to be associated with him and his his changed business. Switching to money, it's getting to be budget time for FY21 budget. The county puts together their proposed budget before we do. And County Executive Mark Elrich is holding budget forums for the public to go to. Most of you know he's a former city council member and would advocate for a county executive to give fair tax payments, tax duplication payments to the city. It's in his court right now. And so I'm urging people to go out to these various forums and say fair tax payments, tax duplication payments for Tacoma Park. We will update information that we have on the website, so there's talking points for the public. The closest forums are October 7th at the Wheaton Library and October 30th at the Silver Spring Civic Building. And we need to make sure that there's some response. The various municipalities in Montgomery County sent a letter outlining the needs of the municipalities in the municipal tax duplication program. There was a letter from the city itself to Mark Elrich about the need for tax duplication funds. And there was also a letter from the 4 municipalities that provide policing services. There's, as to my knowledge, not been any action on these. And so it is time, as they're preparing the FY21 budget, to work with us to get the right numbers into their budget. I think Mr. Silverman just left, but one of the things that's exciting, and Councilmember Dabala's not here, we're pleased to learn that the city has been selected to participate in the December project launch of the Thriving Earth Exchange. It pairs up scientists with communities to work collaboratively to address an issue using a scientific approach. Our project proposal involved evaluating our existing stormwater infrastructure in light of increased rainfall to determine the system's weak spots and potential areas of likely overcapacity. So the very items that Mr. Silverman just referenced is something that we will be doing through this program. We're really happy that COG and Councilwoman Dabala worked with us to get us into this program, and they seem very excited to work with us. So it's a new project on our plate. As Councilmember Member C mentioned, Ward 6 traffic issues is a big issue. We've got in Wards 1 and 3 utility work that's ongoing and changing, but will complete at some point. In Ward 5, we've got Flower Avenue project, which will be completed at some point. Ward 6 has construction issues that will be ongoing and changing for some time, and then you'll have a permanent different change with the Purple Line. And so part of the discussion that we're having is how do we handle the difficulties of construction, and then what is the appropriate kind of routing and approach for safety and sanity that we can have once the Purple Line is completed. And so I think there's a lot going on. I appreciate that planning staff, police staff, and certainly Councilmember Searcy have been working really hard on trying to put some pieces together. Part of this is going to need real money for real traffic engineering. It shouldn't come from the city. I think that it doesn't take much if you get some of the folks to this area to see that this is significant and the folks need to cough up the money. And so we'll be working together to address this. We also have to work closely with private property owners, especially the shopping center owners, because they are impacted, but they also contribute to the problem. And so we have to figure out the right ways to make improvements in the area. Quick note on right of first refusal properties, which I often have in the list. These are properties that we're not planning on purchasing. 7611 Maple Avenue, which is a single condominium unit, and 408 Elm Avenue, a single family residence. We have another new exciting thing, and I think Councilmember Kostick may be particularly interested. October marks the start of the Maryland STEM Festival. And this year, the city has partnered with the Institute of Transportation Engineers to do a special transportation day in Tacoma Park at the Rec Center on Saturday, October 19th from 3:30 to 5. There'll be interactive transportation activities that explain the fundamentals of traffic safety, engineering, and traveling around town by all modes. And we can walk them up to the intersection. We'll come up with something good. But anyway, this is something that our staff has been working on, and it's really exciting that we've partnered on this. We had the kind of the report out about the closed session that happened last week. One of the outcomes has to do with finance department reorganization and new positions. So I have information, fairly extensive information in my city manager comments about what we're proposing. Essentially, finance office is one of these places where we have two important positions, finance director and the payroll, the person who prepares the payroll for the city, that has absolutely no backup for some of their activities. If they are out, we do not have somebody who can fill in. And so we need to have some redundancies within that unit. And we also need to, given the sophistication and changes in the financial systems, the IT systems, have someone who can handle that. So we're redefine the positions, and I appreciate the action by council to let us move forward on this quickly while we have some vacancies and can take advantage of this time, which doesn't hurt existing staff, to be able to make improvements in that. As mentioned in the announcement, it will affect the city's budget by about $25,000 this year, and on an ongoing basis, about $20,000 per year by the changes, and that will come before you in the next budget amendment. And wanted to note my schedule. We've got the MML conference coming up October 13th to 15th. And then the Deputy City Manager and I will be at the International City County Management Association Conference October 19th to 23rd. So that is going to mess up Councilmember Searcy. I won't be in town for that other meeting. And for those people who are trying to sell me things in advance of these conferences, if you contact me, I won't come to your booth. I will not buy your product. I am really tired of that. Are there any questions that you have?
No.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for that report. All right, and just a note for folks, the city manager's comments are always put up on the website, so if you want to go back and look at something, you can. Now we have 2 work sessions. The first one is our continued discussion of our housing and economic development strategic plan, and I think I'm turning it over to the city manager.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's all me tonight until we get to sign, so
Okay.
Appreciate your time. So we're here again tonight to discuss the draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. This is an aggressive and transformational document. It provides the direction, push, vision to move Tacoma Park to a whole new level while protecting and nourishing the best of Tacoma Park. The community is facing significant and growing threats from climate change, economic segregation, racial inequities, and a lack of opportunity for many, many residents in Tacoma Park. We are not successfully treading the economic waters right now. Without significant action by the council right away, we will miss some time-sensitive opportunities for funding and for some other assistance. And, I was thinking about that. We've been spending a very long time on this plan, several years. We've had surveys, forums, consultant research done, stakeholder interviews. We've discussed big picture issues, and we've argued over wording of indicators. With all of that, it's easy to be too close to the words to see the import of this larger document. And I'm happy that within the last couple of weeks, I think there's been really a focus on that import of that larger document. I think now we have a document to be proud of. What is before you is the meat of the plan. It's the elements that the council would consider for adoption, and then you'll have an adopting resolution. The implementation schedules, the measurement indicators will be added by staff in consultation with council and will change over time. We will present a document eventually with graphics, with a short version to help communicate the information to the public. This plan is both exciting and usable, which isn't always the case, and it is needed immediately. county and state officials are aware of this plan. They're looking forward to seeing it, and they want to help Tacoma Park. They want to also be transformative and responsive to their constituents. And so when we have, as staff, have shared some components of this, you see them getting excited and how it fits into some of their larger plans. I really appreciate the work the council members have done going through this bit by bit. What I have tonight is modifications of what had been posted online based on the many comments of council and some extra comments from staff. So as I go through, I'll highlight where we've made changes and identify those sections where some discussions could still continue from you. And so we've got some wording changes in the overview. I think one of the more significant things is that it makes it clear that this strategic plan is designed to cover the period between now and the year 2030, that it will be reviewed periodically as conditions, needs, and available resources change, and as part of biannual staff status presentations before the City Council. It notes specifically that the plan calls for actions that align with the regional housing targets adopted recently by the Board of Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments in response to the 2019 report, The Future of Housing in Greater Washington, a regional initiative to create housing opportunities, improve transportation, and support economic growth. It's really quite phenomenal work that the Council of Governments did, and then the fact that we were able to build on that is, I think, very exciting. One of the quick things I'll note, things that are highlighted in yellow are ones that council members have wondered, should they be in just one section or in two sections or three sections? So as we go through, this may be something we come back to at the end, but I just want to give that explanation. There was some,
I see, Madge, I just want to let the council members know that you have copies of this in your folder.
You have copies of this in the folder. I did hand out to most of the folks who are in the audience also copies of that. I also provided council members with kind of the marked up version of things from before, so if you had private notes, you could look at those again and raise them. So some of the wording changes are simply to make them make the provisions sound better. I'm not going to read through those. On Objective 1, preserve the affordability of existing multifamily housing stock. Under Strategy B, we clarified that strategy by adding to develop criteria for pilot agreements and work to extend housing affordability agreements. On Strategy C, we note that we should take into account the recommendations of the city's Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. One of the other things that I did, and this is something that most council members did not see, but it was in response to Councilmember Kovar's communication with this afternoon, is to add something we should have had in there, but is recognition of folks with disabilities. And so in terms of conserving and improving the physical conditions, safety, resiliency, and energy efficiency of existing low to moderate cost housing stock, and talking about funding improvements to those buildings, that in addition to major infrastructure components of the buildings, to also look at universal design elements which make units more accessible to people with disabilities. Another thing that I clarified from some of the previous versions the council members have seen is elements related to zoning changes. So zoning is one of those things that people's eyes glaze over when they hear the word zoning. And so I wanted to be a little bit more clear about what was meant on some of the different provisions that affect, where zoning could affect it. So in terms of facilitating partnerships and policy changes to permit or encourage commercial or nonprofit use in portions of residential buildings or property to promote economic stability of the property, I note that zoning text amendments may be an option to help do that. There may be something that says it's appropriate in an otherwise residential zone for a multifamily building to allow for more than just a barber shop in an apartment building, but as a way to help build some economic stability so that the property overall can survive. Or especially in common ownership communities, condominiums, as a way to help offset their expenses. One of the questions that has come up is we had a strategy for expand opportunities for economic self-sufficiency for Tacoma Park residents and businesses. So we gave some examples of how you would get to economic self-sufficiency. There might be workforce development initiatives and training. This is a concept that if somebody has some money, they actually then have the capacity to help do other kinds of things in terms of property maintenance or participating in a business association, things that can help move them to the next stage of success for their business or community. Under retain and strengthen local businesses, the strategy A, which is outreach to local businesses, there was some back and forth about making sure that areas that didn't have business associations were also represented. We changed the language of this just to clarify it, to connect with all businesses, whether or not they're represented by a business association. Gave some more examples of how you could intentionally celebrate and promote local businesses. And it could be direct by the city, it could be indirect through a business association or another government. It could include events or citations, tours, or other kind of media promotion, and there's a long list of things that it could be. Another thing that we realized really wasn't explicitly included in the earlier version is to develop citywide business support services through partnerships that provide business training, coaching, and consulting services to Tacoma Park businesses and entrepreneurs. We are starting to do that now, but we didn't explicitly call it out, and we wanted to make sure that was explicitly called out. Under the seeking changes to local, county, state, and federal decisions, policies, legislation, regulations, and funding to support the objectives that have been mentioned before, I added some additional language that would talk a little bit again about what might be done in zoning changes. There might be minor master plans. There might be sector plans. There could be county zoning map or text changes. And then there's a variety of other kind of policies or provisions that could be addressed. We are not looking, even though it's 20 years since we had a Tacoma Park master plan, there's no way we're getting a citywide master plan, but we can get some minor master plans for certain geographic areas, and we can get zoning text amendments that might address certain kinds of buildings or certain kinds of activities that then affect different areas of the city, but aren't calling into question major changes to zoning maps in these other areas. So I just wanted to be explicit about the different approaches that could be done. In the section that is, I have to go up here and say, produce new units. Under Objective 1, increase the number of units and variety of housing types across the affordability spectrum that are attractive to a diverse demographic and do not result in economically segregated communities. I added some language into Strategy A at the last minute, as you haven't seen this, that not only are we looking at the kinds of different housing types that are underrepresented in Tacoma Park, but are desired by existing and new residents of various incomes, I also say residents of various needs, abilities, and family configurations. We've had a lot of discussion of those things, but we should also be kind of give those as some examples of the kinds of things that we would look at in terms of underrepresented housing. Under encourage the construction of new moderate and higher density infill residential, commercial, and mixed-use development and redevelopment. I did not replicate that language, but that's because we're still referring back to it in terms of looking for underrepresented housing types. I did expand the strategy C, which had been develop and maintain partnerships with nonprofit, for-profit, and governmental entities, to be explicit that it could be local, regional, or national firms or entities that we could have partnerships with. We're already in discussions with fairly large entities, but some folks were not realizing that, we're not just looking at a local nonprofit. We're looking at some fairly significant partnerships that can help move Tacoma Park forward on fairly creative initiatives. Councilmember DeBala mentioned appropriately that where we have development or new construction, we can also say redevelopment. I just assumed they're the same thing, but it was helpful for her to identify, to add redevelopment, so I've done that. Again, taking into account the recommendations of the city's Sustainability and Climate Action Plan when we do development. And again, seek changes to county zoning text or other requirements to help facilitate these concepts in terms of having climate change in mind. It's not a zoning map kind of change, but it could be a zoning text change that helps us accommodate climate change resiliency into a new construction. In cultivating entrepreneurship among residents, we added some more explicit language about how we would work with folks to facilitate creation of spaces to start and grow businesses. It could be pop-up spaces, as we'd said before, studios, workshops, non-traditional office and collaboration spaces. Again, changes to the county's allowable use provisions or zoning code may be needed. So this may be a thing where a commercial zone doesn't really allow for pop-ups, but you could write in pop-ups or so those kinds of things. Maybe, artist studio, live work unit may not be explicit, but it doesn't really undercut the otherwise existing zoning of a section. So it's really trying to help, gives better information about those. On the outreach to entrepreneurs, we also made it clear, a good recommendation by council, to connect staff at the city and other partners to existing and potential business owners and entrepreneurs. Under Objective 4, attracting new business to Tacoma Park and facilitating the growth of existing businesses, particularly those that help meet workforce development, local ownership, or other goals defined by this plan, under Strategy B, market development and redevelopment opportunities in the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads, New Hampshire Avenue Corridor, and Long Branch areas, as well as opportunities that may arise from zoning changes pursuant to a minor master plan of an area that includes but is not limited to the former hospital site. I wanted to be very explicit about that for a couple reasons. One is that when we have, right now, the hospital property and a number of institutionally occupied properties in Tacoma Park are zoned for single-family homes. That is not what is likely to be desired there or developed in those locations. So some kind of a zoning map amendment is likely needed. It is best, it's highly recommended not to do spot zoning of a small parcel. When we have had discussions with the Montgomery County Planning Department about this area, it's important that we not just do rezoning of the hospital property or the hospital and university property, but that it continue, for example, down Maple Avenue, down to about this property because of the impacts on schools from potential extra zoning or opportunity for new school buildings. And you cannot, under the way the county calculates things, you need to actually cover that area so that once it comes down and touches Piney Branch Elementary School, it allows for a lot more flexibility in that community discussion about potential uses of the hospital property. So in other places, I'm fairly general about zoning changes, and this one I reference very specifically a minor master plan, which would have then a zoning map change that implements it. The other thing that is in a couple different places is Objective 5, which is implement and enforce anti-discrimination and race equity provisions in City of Tacoma Park, Montgomery County, State of Maryland, and federal policies and regulations. And the strategy A under produce is implement and enforce anti-discrimination and race equity provisions as new development is considered and produced and as assistance is provided to residents and businesses. When I was putting this provision in this document, I put it under both produce and protect, which is the next one, but not the first one, which is preserve. This is when there's these changes that are happening, and especially I think with production, making some very conscious choices about where something's located, how it's designed, who it's to serve, I think needs to be part of the discussion. So that's why I had it in two places. Councilmember DiBala was thinking that it should only be in one place, or maybe it should be in the first, the last place. So I'm just giving you it's highlighted as a discussion point for you, but I'm just giving you my rationale for putting it here and in the next subject area, which is the protect. In protect, in kind of protecting, I should read the definition here. Mm-hmm. Protect renters, homeowners, local businesses from discrimination and displacement, protect our environment from destruction. And I think in one place there was it's degradation and destruction, so we can look and see how we want to word that. Under Objective 2, it was provide opportunities for economic self-sufficiency for Tacoma Park residents and businesses to avoid displacement. So the first, for the strategy, the only strategy that was there on the original version was to help individuals and businesses have self-sufficiency so that they could ward off displacement. That helps that. But in the various discussions that we've had, including today, Ms. Grace Wiggins has spent many, many, many hours recently working with problem situations of folks who are ready to be evicted, have problems in their business, in their home, have utilities that have been disconnected, have mental health challenges. Making it not simple answers. You can't just give them $500 to pay the electric bill and all the problems go away. These are complex, difficult, time-consuming things that affect a lot of our residents. I wrote up strategy B, facilitate the provision of assistance to residents to avoid eviction or utility disconnection, to address food insecurity and unsafe situations, and to obtain needed health and mental health assistance. I think this really does help avoid a lot of displacement that could occur that we don't think about because we're looking at the house in this category. But these are situations that can easily get out of hand, and they really affect so many people. And that is it. The Objective 5 or 6 in some, which is seeking the various policy changes, is in each of the categories, and it's identically written. You could keep it in each of the categories identically written, or you could put it somewhere else and say it applies to all of them. It doesn't matter to me. This actually works a little bit better just in terms of the document, but that was a question that had been raised.
Mm-hmm. And it's just that we have Minori.
And I know, I saw that. I liked Minori. I thought that was kind of interesting. I saw that this afternoon. I was like, okay, I didn't quite correct that. I originally had mini master plan because it's often referred to as that. So I went through and changed it, but I didn't take out that I. So that will get corrected. Anyway, I feel like I have addressed a number of the wording issues. There's also been a draft resolution language that's been circulating. I did not bring it forward today. It would be something that I've not had it really run through our staff yet, but I'd like to get that moving quickly so it could be posted also for consideration for October 16th.
Great.
In addition, we do have still on our website the old implementation chart that we had prepared, information on indicators that we would need to rework given this outline, but we have all that information. I think we just need to assemble in one place.
Terrific. Great, so we can open it up for discussion. If people want to talk about sort of like big picture things, or if there are small wording changes. Our goal is to vote on the plan, vote on the resolution adopting the plan on our next meeting, which will not be next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday.
That's right. Get up to the top here.
Councilwoman Kiersey, do you want to go first?
I guess I gotta push the button first. First, I just want to say thank you to staff and the city manager for continuing to plow away on this document. I think one of the things that I am starting to realize is we're being asked questions about weighing in on issues such as the city's stance on housing priorities regarding the Purple Line, and especially as it relates to Langley Park, or when we're being asked specifically what are some of the things that we want to see happen as it pertains to housing. I think this document will be really helpful at a very high level of establishing what the city's priorities are. I recognize that everything is going to be very case specific, right? So you'll get into the weeds when you actually identify the case specific problem you're trying to tackle.
Correct.
But I do think that having a document that can clearly communicate not only the council's priorities, but also more globally, but also our priorities as it pertains to housing, I think is really important. So I don't think that we could try to be a little bit maybe ambitious, but I think that the strategies that are outlined here are rooted in reality based on our budget and based on the number of staff that we have available to do the work. So
if I can interrupt on
Yeah.
that though, there has not been a recommendation for zoning change in the time I've worked here. I mean, when we did the Tacoma Park Master Plan, other than the sector plan right around the Purple Line,
right, Langley Park.
Nothing has changed. We're still working on stuff that really was from the 1970s. And the mere fact that this council is interested in those kinds of transformational changes is remarkable and strong, and provides a really good base for the kinds of actions that are being asked for in these other plans elsewhere. Mm-hmm. It's a big deal. It doesn't necessarily look like it, but when it comes to what is needed to actually get movement at the county and the state level, it has the real strong base that will allow us to move to that next level. It will set Tacoma Park really in the right place for 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. And that's exciting to me. I didn't know that we would get here, and I think it's terrific.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Let me get this thing over here. I do appreciate all the comments from staff and my colleagues, and especially I know the city manager. I sent a range of requests and suggestions, and some were considered nice, and some were considered less nice, and some were modified. But that's
I tried to always be nice.
No, that's exactly how it should go. That some didn't pass muster, and the arguments against them were clear. And I think a number of the things that I thought were really important to have in there a bit more of an explicit way. I'm very pleased that they're in here, and I'll just mention, I thought this is, being more specific on zoning was important, and that appears in a number of spots. I thought making it clear that the partners we would work with could include national and regional ones as well as local ones is really
Absolutely.
important, because I think that's how we get to really move the needle in these areas. I appreciate the fact that disabled housing, I think it's mentioned in a couple of spots now.
Yeah.
And the question of eviction, that's great to have in there. Also, on the yellow sections, so-called, where they repeat, I think it's good to have some things repeat, because what you want to be able to do, to me, is look at a given strategy and have everything that's part of it there,
Yeah.
and not have to say, well, wait a minute, I guess when we do this, we're also supposed to, did we say back somewhere else that we're going to keep in mind climate change and racial equity?
Yeah.
We did, but you don't want people to have to go back and forth. So to me, it's worth it to repeat that. I can see how others might disagree with that, but to me, that makes sense. There are really just a handful of things that I wanted to ask about. I noticed, I was one of the people who thought we should be more explicit in terms of designed to cover the period between now and the year 2030. I think it's really, say, between now and through the year 2030, because between means it wouldn't include 2030.
Yeah, in 2030, it all goes away.
Right, but so we might want to cover it. But anyway, so that's minor. A couple of other things I'll just mention, and we can decide whether we want to do them right now or just tweak them before the vote. In our council priorities document, we had some fairly detailed things about policies affecting renters, and we kind of circle around the edges of them, but don't get to them that specifically here. And I just sort of feel if they were important enough for us to vote on them and include them in the council priorities in a specific way, we ought to just take another look at whether we could be more specific on those. So that's one thing.
Councilmember
Yeah.
Kovar, one of the ways that I kind of wanted to deal with that, I appreciate that very much. One of the things ways I wanted to think about that was to actually in the document have the council priorities included,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's in an actual complete document. And there could be some neat graphic call-outs of a box that would highlight something from one of the priorities that is about renters or something, so that it is clear that it was being thought of through this process. So if there's some place where you want to include it in this, that's fine, but I also just wanted to say that in terms of an overall, once we package with the graphics and everything else, package that information, I think it'll show that they're interconnected.
I'd be open to that. I think it's just important to have that link. And I can't remember whether we have in here similarly the public space plan and also the resident survey on the kinds of new businesses they liked and things like that, whether we want to connect to that or not. I don't feel strongly about that, but I think we ought to just make a conscious decision one way or the other about whether we're going to do that. And there's just three other things. I'm just going to toss them out there. We've talked some about helping seniors stay in their homes, and I don't know whether others would agree with me, whether that's something specific. We do touch on that in the form of the tax breaks that we're going to be talking about, that Councilmember DeBala in particular was a strong advocate for. I think it would be interesting to have that in there. I wonder whether Mr. Olson's comment about refugees is something that we might want to consider as well. And the last thing is, and I'll just refer to the spot, and you all can tell me I'm wrong, and if that's how you feel, and we can move on. But on page 6 of this document, down at the very bottom, this is objective 4, and this is within preserve, and it's strategy B. And says, as development occurs, work to keep local businesses in Tacoma Park, et cetera. And that's an extremely laudable thing to do. There's something about that, as development occurs, which just feels very passive to me. And I don't know if there's a way to make it more active, because it reads to me like, we'll kind of wait around, and if something comes up, we'll jump into action, as opposed to we're going to be doing this all the time, almost in anticipation of it. And maybe I'm overthinking it, but that one just kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit.
And I'll address it.
Yeah.
So the kinds of protections and outreach that you're talking about are in this document numerous places.
I agree
And
with that.
so this is, for those things, if there's going to be development that we're not leading or pushing, all of a sudden somebody comes along and buys the white building on New Hampshire Avenue and da-da-da, well, that's as development, then we have to jump into and react. So this was the one time when it was more like, if something's happening, make sure that we don't just say, well, it's not our project,
Yeah.
so we're not gonna mess with it. So that was the reasoning behind it. I'm happy to
It may,
deal with
it
text.
may be that it's unnecessary, it was just, it jumped out at me as
Uh-huh.
less active than some of the others, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Right,
So
well, I just
that-
wanted to make sure that we cover areas
Yeah.
where we are reactive and we still protect people.
Right, and I think that's fine. So with those points, and so the only things I would just ask my colleagues, and I'd be interested in whether you think a specific reference to refugees and/or to helping seniors stay in their homes, more specifically than we currently have with the reference to the tax credits, would make sense in here.
It's a hard question. No, I don't like the refugee. I mean, like, what kind of question is that?
Should we call it out specifically?
You know, I think, I do.
I thought it was a good point.
No, I think it's a good point. We certainly mentioned it in our, again, in the council's priorities. It is part of why I added in the language about various incomes, needs, abilities, family configurations, those kinds of things that kind of help
I mean,
address.
you could even say immigration status or something like
It
that.
could say immigration
Yeah.
status. That might be a nice add.
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. And for the seniors, I mean, again,
A lot of this addresses seniors. I mean, I don't know if we do talk about ages in a number of places. We talk about keeping people in their homes, retrofitting with universal design. So there's a variety of those places. If there's a specific place that you think
I'll
it should
take a
be
look.
added, you can let me know.
all right, thank you.
I like the immigration status. That was a good, yeah.
Okay.
My one request regarding the seniors is I would like to emphasize keeping seniors in the community, not necessarily in their home, because I think there might be alternative places that would be better as people age.
They're bees. No. Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to start off by expressing my appreciation and to the city manager and the city staff and my colleagues for the great amount of work that's been put into this and the quality of that work. I think we have put together a good plan. In all my years on the council, we've just for housing kind of been holding our own, not really looking towards the future of how we can improve the housing or improve our housing policies. We've done a little bit better, I think, with the economic development, but only a little bit better. We've seen some good growth in the businesses here in Tacoma Park, but not on the scale that we're envisioning with this plan. And so I'm really pleased to see this. I think, as I've expressed on other aspects of the city government, having plans and strategic plans, not just having a plan for where we want to go, but having a vision of how we plan to get there is key to success. And so I'm really enthusiastic about this plan. I would just like to express my strong support of this, my appreciation for bringing it together, and my intent to move forward with this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Costick, do you have more to say?
Yeah, I just have, first of all, I just want to reiterate the thanks to all of the staff members who I know have worked very, very hard on this, as well
Yes,
as.
I realized that I didn't specifically note that the 3 HCD managers are here. We have Roz Grisby, Samira Cook Gaines, and Grace Wiggins here. They have done remarkable amount of work. And one of the things that's been really nice is that they have taken some of their experiences and helped craft some of this language so it's more appropriate even than it would have been several months ago.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I
No,
was
no, thank
realizing
you.
I didn't say that I'm really glad they're here.
Yes, yeah, so are we. And I appreciate all of the time looking at all of the input that we as a council have provided as well, because I know that is really time consuming. I just have one very, very small thing. In objective number 5 at the very end on page 13, strategy A, and I think this is repeated in the earlier section as well. The very last part says, and policies or funding related to energy efficiency and transportation. If possible, I would like to add partnerships to that as well, because I think there may be opportunities related to energy efficiency and transportation in particular, where there may be opportunities to partner with other levels of government
okay.
or
So not just
outside
funding, you
groups.
meant partnerships with,
Yeah.
okay.
Mhm.
I probably meant that and just
Yep.
didn't put that in there. Good.
And that's it. Thank you.
Great. I'll just add, in terms of the questions that were asked, again, just repeating, like adding immigration status. I agree with Councilmember Kovar. I think repeating each section, we, thought of organizing this similar to how Urban Institute presented its recommendations to COG under these. I mean, we've made them our own. But this idea of preserve, produce, protect, and to be able to look at each section individually, I think will also be important and not have to flip back and forth. So I agree with that as well. And I have to say, having looked at this document so many times, want to thank for the additional strategy B under Objective 2 under Protect, and looking at not only the physical buildings that we're thinking about that people live in, but really also focusing on how do we actually help people so that they can stay in their housing. And I just really appreciate that addition to this. And I just want to add my thanks to the staff working on a document in which you have 7, 8, 9, 10 people writing over months.
It was a committee effort.
It is, that can be difficult, and I just want to say I truly appreciate all of your work. I also want to just say that, looking at this plan, talking to my colleagues who work regionally, being able to serve on the COG board, talking to colleagues who are in Prince George's County working on housing plans and other places, this is really an aggressive, forward-looking plan in what we're doing here. And I appreciate all the effort that has gone into this. And I also want to say there is a huge urgency in us moving forward with this. We started looking at housing issues more in depth back in February of 2016, when we convened a community conversation here and brought stakeholders together nationally, regionally, and members of the community to first just start a conversation on what do we mean by housing affordability, and what do we need in our community. And we know Councilmember Schultz had been talking about the economic development piece for many years as well. And so to get to this place after all of the input, planning, and looking at the data, I think is a great place to be. In addition, the urgency, and the city manager alluded to this, is the work that many people in our community don't actually see or hear about. And our staff deal with it every day, and I just really want to call out the work of our city manager, and in particular, our housing and community development manager. The amount of hours and work that go into assisting people in our community who are in vulnerable situations is just really incredible, and I thank you all for that work. And when I do hear of the work that you're doing, it does increase the urgency for me of this issue. And I just want to also acknowledge my colleague, Councilmember Siemens, who's been working very hard on homeless issues. And, thinking of all those stories, those are the ones, these are the people who we're doing this work on behalf of. So I'm really excited about moving forward with this and looking at the resolution in a couple of weeks. In addition, one of the things that I want to see in our resolution is for us as a city of Tacoma Park to acknowledge that there is a fundamental human right to adequate housing, and to have that called out in our resolution, and to really have an obligation for us to take reasonable legislative and other measures within our available resources to achieve the realization of this right. And so I look forward to having that conversation, but I think it's an important one that as we're doing all this work on our strategic plan, that we also acknowledge where we're going and what our overall goal is for the public. And so I think with that, those are all my comments, and I look forward to reading this more.
If anybody has any last tweaks, please get them to me soon. I'd like to be able to post this and the draft resolution relatively soon so that the public has enough time over the next 2 weeks to look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Moving forward then, we have our final work session, which is a discussion of amendments to the Tacoma Park Code, Title 11, Section 11.04.060, regarding placement of private signs and advertisements in the public right-of-way. And we are joined now by our city attorney. And I just, as a preface, before we get into the details, want to say that this was something, we keep evoking poor Councilwoman DeBala, I feel like tonight. But this was something that actually came up first in the last election and Councilman DeBala had wanted us to revisit this because it is not very clear in our current code regarding the placement of signs, and did become an issue last year, particularly or during the last election in Ward 2. In addition, it became something of a bit of confusion among residents because of inconsistency of how signs were taken down, and whether or not signs for pets, lost pets, were kept up when other signs were taken down, and at whose discretion that was being done. And so we wanted to revisit this with the goal of making the code much clearer to residents, as well as making sure, with the advice of our city attorney, that we're doing the right thing here as it comes to First Amendment rights. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Ken.
Okay. So what this ordinance does is prohibit the installation or posting of private signs in the public right-of-way. And private signs means non-government signs, so be they an individual, a business, or even a nonprofit. They will not be allowed to post signs in the right-of-way. And it eliminates some exceptions in the code we had for certain non-commercial signs. And the reason for that is to avoid First Amendment violations. When you regulate a sign based on its content, it's subject to strict scrutiny, and so it's likely to be unconstitutional. The reason we're dealing with this issue is because of the proliferations of signs in the right-of-way. It causes visual clutter. It can interfere with sight lines for vehicles and pedestrians. And also, the law is difficult for residents to follow and difficult for staff to enforce right now. So it's a sweeping change, but I think it's necessary to avoid First Amendment violations and to promote public safety and reduce visual clutter. One thing that is not in the draft that's before you is a definition of the public right-of-way, which can be added before first reading. I can read what I've proposed. As I was telling the mayor earlier, unfortunately, most definitions of right-of-way include right-of-way in the definition. So what I have here is public right-of-way means public highways, streets, roads, alleys, pedestrian walkways, and any property adjacent to such facilities acquired for the operation or use of such facilities or for passage by pedestrians or the installation of utility transmission facilities. And so what we're, in practical terms, think about it, the area in front of your house next to the street where utilities are installed, where there are sidewalks, where pedestrians have the right to travel. So that's that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. I know Councilman DeBala did have a question. I wanted to ask just in case she's feeling well enough to be watching. So one of the questions that she received from a resident was, the signs that are that say like slow, like kids here play safely, and they're kind of like the plastic sandwich board signs, or sometimes it's like a little yellow cutout of what is supposed to look like a child. Would that, you know the ones I'm talking about? Would that be, where do they fall?
I mean, I'm familiar with the little plastic cutouts, and I mean they're movable. I don't think that they would qualify as a sign. I mean, obviously we don't want them blocking sight lines, and staff could move those back if they're a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Councilmember Kovar?
Yeah, does your definition, thank you for the information, does your definition include, of the right-of-way include parks, or is it only things we walk or drive or convey through?
It does not include parks, but that would be public property, which we can control.
But
we can-
if I can, a lot of times there are things that look like parks that are really right-of-way. They're like paper
Right.
streets and those kinds of things. So that's one of the problems sometimes with the definition of right-of-way, is that it's hard to actually identify if it's right-of-way or not. But parks is not, you can't put signs in parks.
So there are these bulletin boards, actually on the edges of some parks. I can think of one in Bell Ziegler Park, that I think anyone can just put up a notice in. And so how does something
Those
like
are
that
city,
fit in?
those were city property, and we allowed the installation of those kiosks, and people can put things on
So that
the
would
kiosks.
continue.
That's a different thing than just sticking a sign up someplace.
Because that's designated for this purpose.
That's my understanding.
Right, I mean, I'm not familiar with those kiosks, but that sounds like that's a public forum that we've created for that purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I'll think about this more, but it didn't seem as if we ever had, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, that we had any First Amendment lawsuits about this. So it just sort of seems to me that for non-commercial uses that are occasional and local and community-oriented and date-specific and timed and with a contact person, if there's some way to permit those kinds of things. I totally understand and I agree, and I get it's hard to draw a bright line on where we would do it, but an endless array of buy houses, or we pick up junk, or purchase this stuff from whoever you are. But the local things just don't bother me that much, and I don't know, no one's ever sued us before, right?
The county has been. And so it was a big issue, I think maybe 15 years ago, and they actually had to change their rules about signs, because they were identifying content as using it to differentiate the kinds of signs and what was allowed, and they lost lawsuits on it. So,
Well, does content also include duration? Is that part of content? I mean, 'cause something like,
no,
there's a- like,
duration.
if there's a memorial service this Saturday and it has a contact person at the bottom, is it the content the same as the duration? Is that?
No, duration is a different issue. We'd have to have the same duration limitations for any kind of sign. But I mean, I don't have a problem with the signs you're talking about either, but I mean, the law is very clear.
But could we say signs that are for 5 days are fine? And under the First Amendment?
We could, but that would
It
have
would
to
be for
cover
everything.
any sign.
You can't do commercial versus other, is what you're
that's
saying.
right.
Correct.
So for everything that says, carpet's cleaned, call this number, or we buy your car, or whatever,
it would fall into that same provision.
But those could be taken down if they didn't have a duration, right? And I'm not trying to
No,
complicate it.
absolutely, you can make it so that that's a standard duration for everything.
Okay, Councilman Costick.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First of all, how would this impact the sort of sign tents that a lot of businesses put out on the sidewalk, just saying, here's our special today, or come in and try this coffee drink, or whatever it might be?
I'm sorry, did you say sign tents?
Yeah, the sort of
Sandwich boards.
The triangle
okay.
sandwich boards, yeah.
I would
I don't
say that this would cover that type of sign.
So
The
those are-
signs should be in the window or on the business's property.
On that, I think it would be interesting to check, because I think that there have been times when we've had like some kind of an arrangement with the business association that says that you could do it in these certain areas as long as it's not in the walkway. Again, I think it's similar to these other situations where like the kiosks in the park, where we've identified that that's an appropriate place for signs. But I don't think that necessarily went through the city attorney's office, so.
There are a number of them I've noticed in Old
Right.
Town and the Junction in particular, where the businesses have signs out, and they're not usually blocking the sidewalk. They're sort of over to the side. But I'd like to make sure that we can allow for that in some way, either through this or through the way that it's enforced or through some additional agreement opportunity.
Does it matter, like, I'm sorry, just to interrupt, but like, would it matter, like, if you're taking it in, because usually they take it inside, like, it's a sign that's taken, it's put out when the business opens, it's taken in when the business closes, so, does that matter?
That would not matter, I don't
Okay.
think. The issue is if we would have some kind of a established agreement as it's city property, I think.
Right, I mean, that would be a possibility.
I was also curious about the little free libraries. Is there any impact on them? I mean, I'm thinking about it. I don't know that they have signs. Maybe they have signs that say, do they have signs that say free library?
But they're on private property usually.
Are they? Are
They're
they
either
usually
on private property
property?
or they go through a permit process with the city. We've identified that it's okay in this section of the right of way and have some agreement.
So yeah, can we
Yeah, I
just
mean, I would say
double-check that
those are
that
not,
interacts?
fundamentally, those are not signs.
Signs.
Okay.
They may have a sign on them, but they have
Okay.
another purpose.
And then my other question was, is this for both city and state right-of-way, or does it only apply to city right-of-way?
I would start with the assumption that it applies on any public right-of-way in the city.
Okay. And maybe this is already assumed in terms of how the poles are permitted, but I was thinking with the notifications for the small cell towers that we were posting and some of the signage on those poles, that would not preclude those sorts of signs.
No, because that's specifically required, by the code rather than, so when you have something specific and something general, the specific provision would control the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. I think as we think about what do we want to not have and what seems to be okay, Councilmember Kovar mentioned things. I think he was alluding to things like maybe yard sales and public events that'd be nice to have. I understand the First Amendment rights that the county ran into problems with in trying to preclude some of the things we don't want here in Tacoma Park. The city manager mentioned carpet cleaning signs. We buy your car for up to $300, whatever. And so some of those types of signs that just kind of are always there when you take them down, they're back the next day, I think are the kinds of things that maybe we would like to not have. But it seems like the law that might have something to do with duration that the sign can be up, the fact that the entity that put it up has to take it down, or there would be a penalty for not taking it down, and maybe a frequency for any entity that, you know, no entity could post a sign that's more often than, you know, once a month, once every 6 months, whatever. Wonder if that type of approach might help to allow acceptable signs and disallow signs that can be a blight on the community.
I think some of those ideas are viable legally. I think the problem is with, and it's similar to some of the things we already have on the books. And I think one problem is enforcement and administration. I think it's difficult to keep track of the signs and how long they've been there, and I think it's also difficult to track down the parties responsible for the putting.
I mean,
the
it's not
signs
hard
up.
to find the person that's going to clean your carpet if you call up and ask them to clean your carpet, so it can't be too hard to find the person when you want to tell them there's a fine. And if you require a date to be posted, which we do have, that the sign has to have a date posted on it when it's put up, it's relatively easy to tell if we've gone past that date by looking at the sign. Requires some effort on staff, but again, I think we have people driving around the streets frequently, and if we were diligent in the beginning, I think it would, you know, we would build the reputation that it's not gonna last. It has to be done. And then my other question is just about, you know, the signs. Some of the signs I've heard complaints about are signs that are actually posted on private property that have to do with, you know, somebody's having their house renovated and they put the architect sign out in the front yard, or the builder's sign in the front yard, and then leave it up there for a year. This work that you're talking about here doesn't have anything to do with that, right?
Right. This is strictly regulating signs in the public right of way.
And you mentioned that the little signs they have with the child's cutout, you know, saying, you know, drive slow in the neighborhood, or pretend it's your child in this neighborhood. You said because that's movable, it probably wouldn't be in effect. So if I had a movable garage sale sign, that would be okay?
I mean, the slow children playing, I mean, it seems more like a toy than a sign, but
again, it's content that can't matter. So if I change the content and I have a rabbit with a sign that says yard sale, then that should be okay.
Or put a sign around the kid. This is
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I
I
don't
did-
know the answer to that. Those are good questions.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Searcy.
I guess one question I have is, you know, does it make sense to include language around what is not considered a sign? I'm thinking about placemaking signs, for example, that the CDA puts up on state poles in the Crossroads area in an attempt to try to provide a sense of place, right? I'm thinking signs that would likely be stuck at entrances of various plazas to make sure that people know where their entrances are during things like Purple Line construction. It might make sense to think of what might be exceptions to the rule and communicate what those are, so that people don't think that if you put a sign, any sign, in the right of way, you're automatically in violation. I'm even thinking about the Crossroads Farmers Market, where they have to put directional signs so that people will know how to find them on Ann Street. So, and you don't want to prohibit signage like that is actually designed to try to encourage patronage of businesses that and functions that we support. So if there are ways in which we can start thinking critically about what we would not consider a sign under this ordinance, that might be helpful.
So I think part of the answer is that public right-of-way is, I know it's an easement, but it's essentially owned by either the city or it's the state highway. And so those kinds of things that you're talking about are affirmatively permitted by either the city or state highway. And so like those banners that go up that are placemaking signs had to get approval from state highway to be able to be installed. As we're, one of the difficult things about the sign ordinance and that kind of thing is that the language that is being talked about is the ordinance, but the information that we'll need to have on the website or in brochures or whatever is the real stuff, which is these kinds of signs are permitted because they've asked for permits from the county or the city or the state and are directional or informational or placemaking, et cetera. And I think you're right. I think a regular person would want to know, okay, that's why me just putting up a sign in my yard sale isn't exactly the same thing. I didn't get a permit from the county to put this sign up or whatever, whatever that situation is. So that's one of the things. I don't know that it's something that shows up in the ordinance, because the ordinance is kind of, maybe there's just a reference that, there's a permitting process for certain informational signs, et cetera. But the real description ends up on what we share with the public.
Right, I agree with Susie that rather than, saying what is and is not a sign, because then, if we run the risk of getting into content if we, essentially it's almost like a public-private sign, and that the city has a role in what they say and where they go, and it's promoting things that are important to the city.
So I'm trying to figure out where we go with this. I hear that there are a few, maybe two people who would prefer if there were some exceptions to this rule. Is that Councilmember Kovar and Siemens? Am I hearing that correctly from the two of you? And I don't know, Councilman Kostick and Searcy and Smith, where you all are leaning towards, in the direction this goes or in the direction that Councilmember Kovar and Siemens.
If I can
Yeah,
clarify
and you
that,
can- yeah.
what I seemed to hear was that since content can't be the discriminating factor, that this could be an issue of a duration on a sign versus not a duration of a sign. So if there was something that signs could be posted with information that were dated and could only stay up for X number of time, it gets away from the content, but it might address some of the content issues that people have.
Right. I think that's what Councilmember Kovar was sort of outlining. I guess the struggle, and I think some of us are having, is putting up missing pet signs or the yard sale or something is just, and certain types of signs at certain times are part of the community and how people do things. And so on the flip side, though, is not putting the burden on staff to have to interpret.
It's a huge burden.
Yeah.
It's a huge burden, and people don't put dates on signs. That's an exception. And the carpets clean thing is plastered. It's almost impossible to remove the signs. Those are horrible things that you take razor blades to try to get them off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, So going around and looking and seeing at each sign, okay, what's the date on this sign? I don't have staff for that. So that's my, I think that it's a reasonable approach to look at, but I also think that in practicality, it's difficult. So I know that that's where that
I say
issue
one other
comes from.
thing. You know, I think other things that I'm still thinking about this as we go along, but other things that neighborhood services staff do, I feel like they do exercise some discretion, right? Well, that car is probably too close to the intersection or that person's driveway, but yeah, it's kind of a quiet street. Maybe I'll let it go. And
They're not to do that.
well, I'm just going to say there's a wide range of discretion in anything that's law enforcement or quasi-law enforcement by definition. And this I just don't hear a clamor for this. And so I mean, I care about the First Amendment as much as anybody, but I just wish we could find a way to instill a little bit of flexibility and still, and I don't know the best way to do
I
that.
appreciate
but-
that. The flip side of it, and I see Ms. Cersei's light on, clutter. Some places just get really, really terrible, and it can be a lot of work to try to get it down. So one of the things is trying to have a kind of a hard line on it. It's not something that we feel good about, I will say that.
Councilman Searcy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, you know, because it does add to clutter and how the city is viewed, right? I also wonder sometimes if the impetus of this also related to people not understanding what the public right-of-way is. And this is something that I am often dealing with. The fact that people don't really realize you do not technically own the property of your front yard all the way up to the street. And so it could be the case, or you can't just go and put, you know, and so part of me wonders, you know, not answering this question or putting another problem on someone else's to-do list, but really trying to think about how can we better educate residents about the public right-of-way, what it is not, what they own, what they don't. And using that as a way to then put something like this out so they understand if you have a sign and you want to put it out, feel free to do so. Just do it 10 feet into your yard and you can have as many signs as you want. That might kind of help with some of the challenges that we have right now.
Yep. All right, so why don't we take a hand vote so that we can provide direction for the next iteration on this. All those in favor of continuing with the direction that the current draft goes in, please raise your hand. Got 3. All those, oh, we only have 6 people tonight. This is gonna suck. All those in favor of asking the city attorney to explore some of the other alternatives like dating of signs or things like that in another draft, please raise your hand. See, I knew this was going to happen. Yeah, 3 and 3. As soon as I told it, yeah, I know. I was like, oh, don't come tonight. You'll be fine. We'll be fine without you.
I'm not trying to persuade anyone, but my concern about the dating particularly is that I would think that could potentially lead to signs that are somewhat offensive or counter to the general belief of many people in Tacoma Park being placed in the right-of-way for an extended period of time. I mean, I could imagine political signs of one type or another potentially being placed in the right-of-way then, right? Or would that be precluded?
That would certainly be.
Unless it come into like hate speech or something.
Right,
But,
no,
yeah.
generally they would be allowed whatever they say.
Okay. All right, next steps.
Go back and think about it.
Yeah. I think if you could think about some of the comments you received tonight.
Present alternatives.
Yeah, and give us some other alternatives. And we'll make sure we have 7 of us next time. So we can.
Okay,
All right. Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. I don't think we have any other business this evening. So remember, we're not meeting next week. Please take a look at the housing plan and the draft resolution and get in comments as soon as possible. We do want to post this, like, end it by the end of the week so that residents have time to look at it, and we'll be voting on it October 16th. So thank you very much. We are adjourned.